Berserk 375 has brought into question Daiba's motives. We know this because Salat made it known that he despises the powerful Kushan sorcerer, and holds him in little regard. I mean, when you refer to someone as a bottomless man, you don't think much of them, that's for sure. So what I want to do is examine all the evidence we have at our disposal and make an assessment on whether or not Daiba is actually good or bad. Now we're first introduced to Daiba indirectly, when Guts' party fought off some of the Pishasha, i.e. familiars created from spiritually infused animals. After their battle, we found out that Daiba used the Pishasha to subjugate the entire Bay Shore. The following night, he would lead demon troops, known as the Daka, to the outskirts of Virtana's harbor, with the intentions of slaughtering anyone and everyone. Eventually though, he would come across Guts, whom he would describe as Kshatriya of Durga. Now, I'm no expert of Hindu mythology, but based on some of my readings, Daiba is referring to Guts as a warrior of rage. What's fascinating though is that Daiba is aware of the Berserker armor. He's aware of the magical influence that it has on Guts. Now this is important because I speculated in a previous video that the Berserker armor mimics the process of becoming an apostle. Only temporarily though. This is important because if Daiba knows about this, then he's also aware of magic that mimics the process of becoming an apostle. We'll get to that later. Now, Daiba would go on to challenge Guts and Serpico, putting the two on their heels for some time. Nevertheless, Daiba would eventually lose the battle, and use his Garuda to provide an escape. Before doing so, however, he would say, "I so wish to establish a great magic empire on this earth. That wish is not going to collapse here." Now, with this, we know Daiba's motive, and we also know that he'll go to any extent at achieving that motive, as noted by the fact that he controls the Pishasha and the Daka, the demon army. But it goes further than this, because not only does he control the demon army, he was the one that created that very demon army. And the process in which he created that demon army is pretty horrific. In fact, it's so egregious that you might even consider him worse than Griffith. And I know that might be a stretch for a lot of you, because Griffith is the worst of the worst, but hear me out here. Now, the man-made Bailet, also known as the Demon Womb or the Reincarnation Vessel, is an artifact that took Daiba's entire life to be made. In fact, he considers it his life work. It was created from still living bodies of apostles, patched and chained together into a vat that is filled with amniotic fluid. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, where do they get the amniotic fluid? Well, they take a female prisoner that is pregnant, rip open her womb, and spill the amniotic fluid into the vessel. So the amount of amniotic fluid that they would have needed would suggest that they needed very many women to do this. And we saw this in a previous chapter when Owen and Laban were saving the various women from Midland. I mean, they literally had probably hundreds of females as captives. So that means that through Daiba's contraption, through the man-made Bailet, Daiba was ripping open the wombs of dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of women. Now, I understand that Griffith sacrificed the Band of the Hawk and raped Casca, but what Daiba is doing here is absolutely below the board and just one of the most egregious things I've ever seen in Berserk. I mean, if you made a list of the top 10 egregious things in Berserk, that's gotta be close to number 1 right there. But it actually gets worse than that, because the babies that are ripped from the women's fetuses are then taken and turned into monsters. They're turned into demons, the Daka. And we saw that the Daka army was massive. So the amount of babies that he turned into demons and the amount of women that he brutalized in the process is just mind-boggling. So for Salat to say that he's the lowest of men is no overstatement. In fact, he might be underselling that point. Now you might say to yourself, Daiba was under the thumb of the ruthless Emperor Ganishka. It's not his fault that he did all this. But then we have to ask ourselves a very important question. How did Emperor Ganishka get ruthless in the first place? It was more of a self-defense mechanism than anything else. He had to protect himself from his early childhood on. And we saw that the reason that he became ruthless and aggressive was because it was a means to protect himself. He was very scared underneath all that. And in his quote-unquote final moments of being a human, what did he have to do? He had to use a Beylit to turn into an apostle. And who gave him that Beylit? Who gave him the Beylit to turn into an apostle, to turn into a monster? It was none other than Daiba himself. So when you consider all the facts, Daiba turned Ganishka into a monster. He turned him into an apostle. Daiba created the Pishasha, animal familiars that were turned into demons. And he also created the Daka, children that were turned into demons from the wombs of pregnant women. And when you think about it, he's not much different from Griffith. Both want their own kingdom. Daiba just wants a magically based kingdom, but it's a kingdom nonetheless. And both go to any extent to achieve their dream. Griffith was placed in a situation where his body was tortured for a year and he had no other choice, at least that's what he thought. He had no other choice but to sacrifice all his friends in the Band of the Hawk for his dream. When you think about it, Griffith and Daiba are not that much different. They're manipulating the people around them to achieve their dreams. At least in the scenario of Griffith, he was trying to elevate everyone around him. He wanted to attain his kingdom and elevate the Band of the Hawk. Whereas Daiba, in pursuit of his dream, is turning everyone into monsters and brutalizing almost everyone that he comes into contact with. Now, I know Daiba was shown to be a quote-unquote nice guy by saving Erika in chapter 340, but even then, Salat was shown to be very leery of his motives. And I quote, the right-hand man of Emperor Ganishka, and a sorcerer who controlled a shadowy Kushan force, the Pishasha. Now, it seems that Salat definitely has reservations working with Daiba, but it's one of those situations where it's like, well, they need all the help they can get to go up against Griffith. Because Griffith has a huge demon army of his own, and a lot of magical abilities to go with that. But ultimately, it is a risk, because Daiba has been shown to be very ruthless. And given that he made his own man-made Beylit, and has some knowledge of the astral realm, given the fact that he had a Beylit in his possession at one point, it makes me think that he might want to use Guts for his own purposes. Let's be honest, he's the one that led Salat to capture Guts. He knows of Guts' strength from Virtanis Harbor, and it's very possible that he might want to harness Guts' strength for his own purposes. In fact, if he could separate the Beast of Darkness from Guts, he might just do that. In fact, I think it's actually very likely that he'll try to do that. Or if he were to find out that Guts has a Beylit in his possession, he might encourage Guts to use that Beylit. He might explain to him that he has more potential than Emperor Ganishka, and by giving in to his urges, he might become the most powerful apostle ever made. So much like Salat, I'm very leery of Daiba at this point. He has no qualms about delving into evil actions to achieve his goals, and much like Griffith, he wants his own kingdom, which means that he'll be blinded by reason. He'll be blinded by his own ambition. And as we've seen before, when you get blinded by your own ambition, you make some very lamentable choices. But tell me what you guys think of these thoughts, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the flip side.